Ethan's world ended the day the outbreak began. He had trusted her, his girlfriend, the girl he thought he'd spend forever with, and his best friend, Mark. Together, they had laughed, planned, and survived until betrayal struck. In the chaos of the apocalypse, as the infected horde swarmed their safe house, Ethan discovered the truth. She and Mark had abandoned him to die. Not only that, they had hoarded supplies meant to save him, leaving him with nothing but despair and the gnawing hunger of betrayal. He remembered the moment vividly, crawling through bloodied rubble, coughing as the smell of decay filled his lungs, watching them escape in the last helicopter out of the city. Rage, sorrow, and helplessness burned through him as the world crumbled. And then he died. But fate had other plans. Ethan woke up in his own bed, the sunlight streaming through his window, the calendar showing a date 1 week before the apocalypse. At first, he thought it was a dream, a cruel illusion. But the familiar weight of his survival instincts confirmed the truth. He had been given a second chance. Ethan felt a strange energy coursing through him, a newfound ability that whispered possibilities into his mind. He could store food, water, and medicine within himself, ready for when the world descended into chaos again. This time he would not be a victim. This time betrayal would not claim him. This time he would rewrite his fate. As he looked out the window, his heart hardened with determination. The apocalypse was coming, and Ethan would be ready. Ethan didn't waste a second. The knowledge of the coming apocalypse weighed heavily on him, but with it came clarity. He had seen the end, and now he had a chance to change it. He started small. First, he tested his new power, a loaf of bread from his pantry. He focused, imagining it safely stored inside him, and to his astonishment, the bread disappeared from sight but still felt weightless in his mind. A moment later, he could retrieve it perfectly fresh, untouched by decay. Next came water, then medicine, even canned goods. His room became a hidden vault of life-saving supplies, all within himself. The possibilities were endless. Ethan smiled, realizing he could survive anything, even worse than the nightmare he had lived. But power alone wasn't enough. He needed strategy. He spent hours analyzing maps of the city, predicting the spread of infection. He recalled the mistakes from his past life, the places he had trusted, the people he had relied on. This time, he would be smarter. As he prepared, a part of him ached for the life he had lost. The betrayal of his girlfriend and best friend was still raw, even though he knew the world hadn't yet broken. He made a silent vow. When the apocalypse came, he wouldn't just survive. He would make them regret every choice that hurt him. By the 7th day, Ethan had not only mastered storing supplies within himself, but had also developed a sharp intuition for danger. He was ready. He could feel the storm approaching, but this time he would meet it on his own terms. As night fell, he looked out into the city skyline, the shadows long and ominous. Tomorrow, everything would begin. Ethan woke to the distant wail of sirens. At first, he thought it was just another emergency drill. But then the news alerts hit his phone, flooding in faster than he could read. Reports of a deadly virus spreading with terrifying speed. People were panicking, looting stores, barricading themselves in their homes. This time Ethan stayed calm. He had seen this before. He moved quickly, retrieving supplies from within himself, food, water, medicine. Everything he needed to survive, but he didn't stop there. As he stepped outside, the streets were already chaos. A car had crashed into a lamp post. People screamed as others tried to flee. The infected, shuffling, growling, eyes blank, appeared around the corner. Ethan's heart raced, but he remembered his past mistakes. He had panicked before, not this time. Using his speed and foresight, he avoided every infected, every panicked civilian who could inadvertently cause danger. He realized his power wasn't just about storing supplies. It sharpened his senses, made him faster, smarter, more aware. He could sense threats before they reached him. By sunset, he had reached a safe house he had scouted during his preparation days. It was empty, secure, and stocked enough to last weeks. He allowed himself a brief moment of relief, and then a cold thought struck him. Mark and his ex-girlfriend were out there, somewhere in this chaos, and they were vulnerable. A fire ignited in Ethan's chest. Survival was priority number one, but revenge would taste sweet. For now, though, he rested, eating and drinking in safety, mentally preparing for what would come next. He had escaped his past fate, but the real game was only beginning. The following morning, Ethan stepped cautiously outside his safe house. The city was eerily quiet, punctuated by distant screams and the occasional shuffling of infected. But this time, he wasn't completely alone. As he scouted for additional supplies, he spotted a small group of survivors trapped on a nearby rooftop, surrounded by a pack of the infected. Instinctively, he knew he could help them. Using his enhanced reflexes, he maneuvered through the chaos, tossing stored food and makeshift weapons to distract the infected, creating a safe path. The survivors noticed him and with hesitant gratitude scrambled to safety. Among them was a young woman named Lila, sharp, resourceful, and clearly a fighter. Ethan felt a spark of something familiar, hope, trust, even attraction. She was nothing like his ex. She had strength, wit, and a sense of loyalty he had almost forgotten existed. Over the next few days, Ethan and the group scavenged together. He shared supplies from within himself sparingly, just enough to earn trust, but never too much. He was learning to balance generosity and survival instinct. But danger was never far. A rival group of ruthless survivors had also taken notice of Ethan's resources. They began to shadow him, observing his movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was a tense game of cat and mouse. Ethan realized quickly that in this new life, alliances were fragile and trust was a weapon. As night fell, Ethan found himself sitting by a fire with Leela, the sounds of the city's chaos surrounding them. For the first time since his rebirth, he felt a sense of possibility, not just for survival, but for something more. And somewhere in the shadows, he knew Mark and his ex-girlfriend were still alive, making mistakes that would eventually lead them back into his path. Ethan's second life was shaping into something unpredictable, dangerous, and thrilling. Ethan had begun to feel a fragile sense of stability with Leela and the survivor group. They scavenged together, defended each other, and even managed brief moments of laughter amidst the chaos. But Ethan knew better than to let his guard down completely. He had lived through betrayal once before, and the memory still burned like a scar. That sense of caution proved wise. One evening, as the group settled into an abandoned warehouse, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the newcomers, a nervous glance, whispered conversations, and a sudden eagerness to be near the supplies he carried. His instincts screamed that something was off. Sure enough, in the dead of night, Ethan woke to the sound of metal clattering. He caught one of the survivors, a man named Derek, trying to steal a portion of his stored supplies. Derek froze, realizing Ethan was awake. You can store all this," Derek stammered, eyes wide. "This is insane." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he assessed the situation calmly, letting Derek squirm under his gaze. "You knew what I could do," he said quietly. "You just wanted to take it." Derek tried to justify himself, claiming desperation, fear, survival. But Ethan could see the truth: greed, envy, and weakness masked as necessity. The betrayal was small but symbolic, a reminder that even in this second chance, human nature didn't change. Ethan's response was measured but decisive. He retrieved the stolen supplies from within himself and confronted Derek in front of the group the next morning. The man tried to deny it, but Ethan had proof: every morsel, every drop of medicine accounted for. "I'm giving you a choice," Ethan said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Leave now or you stay, and I make sure you never hurt anyone in this group again." Derek left. Silence hung over the survivors like a heavy fog. Leela looked at Ethan with a mixture of respect and relief. "You're not just strong, you're smart," she said softly. "I've never met anyone like you." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. Survival wasn't just about fighting the infected, it was about navigating the dark hearts of people, too. And in this new world, he would not repeat the mistakes of his past life. As he looked out at the ruined city skyline, he made another vow. Betrayal would not touch him again, not from anyone. Ethan had survived betrayal once, and he refused to let it happen again. The memory of Mark and his ex-girlfriend haunted him like a shadow, but now he had time, power, and strategy on his side. He began to map their likely movements. He remembered the mistakes they had made during the first apocalypse, the shortcuts they had taken, the arrogance that had let him survive when they thought he was gone. Using this knowledge, Ethan started plotting a plan, careful and methodical. But revenge wasn't his only focus. He also worked to strengthen his bonds with Leela and the survivor group. He trained them, shared survival tactics, and taught them how to remain calm under pressure. His powers became a secret advantage, allowing them to live longer and safer than most. At night he sat with Leela around a small fire. "You know," she said softly, "you seem different, like you've seen the end and come back stronger." Ethan smiled faintly. "I've seen what betrayal looks like up close, and I've learned that the people who hurt you rarely get second chances, but me, I do." They shared a quiet moment, a rare flicker of warmth in a world gone mad. Ethan felt a deep connection to her, a bond formed not out of fear or necessity, but trust and respect. This, he realized, was something worth fighting for, something his ex-girlfriend and Mark could never understand. As he planned his next moves, Ethan couldn't ignore the thrill of strategy. He would survive, yes, but he would also make sure the people who had destroyed his life in the first apocalypse paid for every wrong. The countdown to confrontation had begun, and Ethan was ready. The city had grown louder, more chaotic. Ethan and his group had moved to a fortified building, its steel doors and barricaded windows giving them a fragile sense of safety. But safety, as he had learned, was an illusion. One night a low, guttural moan echoed from the streets below. Ethan's senses sharpened immediately. He could feel the infected closing in, their presence heavy in the air. "Everyone, get ready," he commanded, his voice calm but firm. The horde descended like a wave, smashing doors, rattling windows, groaning in unison. Panic could have spread, but not with Ethan leading. He tapped into his power fully, pulling out emergency supplies from within himself. Knives, bandages, food, and water, all ready to sustain the group through a prolonged siege. He fought strategically, using the horde's momentum against them. Leela and the others followed his instructions perfectly, blocking entrances, luring stragglers away, and securing escape routes. Ethan moved with precision, storing and retrieving tools and weapons in an instant, his power now fully synchronized with his instincts. By dawn, the streets were littered with the aftermath. The survivors were exhausted but alive, their morale bolstered by the fact that they had survived what could have been certain death. As they regrouped, Leela approached Ethan, concern in her eyes. You make it look easy. I don't know how you do it." Ethan shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "I've lived through the worst once. I won't let it happen again. Not to me, not to anyone I care about." For the first time, he allowed himself a fleeting moment of pride. He had not only survived, he had thrived. But in the shadows, far across the city, two familiar figures were watching. Mark and Ethan's ex-girlfriend had survived too, and they were starting to realize that the man they had betrayed was no longer the same. Ethan had grown stronger, physically, mentally, and strategically. The city was a battlefield, but he now moved through it with purpose, not fear. Every step, every decision was calculated. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was hunting. Mark and his ex-girlfriend had left traces of their movements, scavenged supplies, abandoned safe houses, careless mistakes that only someone with Ethan's knowledge could notice. He tracked them silently, moving like a shadow through the ruins. Yet even as revenge burned in him, Ethan maintained a balance. He ensured Leela and the group were safe, training them to defend themselves, teaching them the value of trust and teamwork in a world gone mad. Their laughter and camaraderie were fleeting, but they reminded him why this second life was worth fighting for. One evening, as the sun set behind the skeletal skyline, Ethan spotted them. Mark, confident and smug, unaware of the predator closing in, and his ex-girlfriend, clinging to him as though her charm could shield them. Ethan felt the familiar fire of betrayal ignite within him. He could have attacked immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he observed, planning. The sweet satisfaction of revenge, he realized, would be in control, in timing, in making them understand just how powerless they had made him feel before. Leela joined him quietly, sensing his focus. "You're thinking about them," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "They think they know me. They think I'm still the same man they left behind. They have no idea who I've become." And with that, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would not only ensure their survival, but also deliver justice on his terms. Ethan had always been patient. Revenge wasn't about brute force. It was about timing, precision, and making the other person feel the consequences of their actions. After tracking Mark and his ex-girlfriend for days, he noticed a pattern. They scavenged during daylight, avoided large groups, and relied on a false sense of confidence. Perfect. He chose an abandoned grocery store as the stage. It was isolated, defensible, and full of supplies they would inevitably need. Ethan spent hours preparing. Barricades, traps, and clever distractions using his stored supplies. He even left subtle hints to lure them in, exploiting their greed and carelessness. When Mark and his ex-girlfriend finally arrived, confident in their stealth, Ethan watched from the shadows. They stepped into his trap almost immediately, triggered by a small device that released a cascade of stored goods, creating noise and confusion. Chaos erupted. Mark and his ex-girlfriend scrambled to escape, but Ethan was ready. Using his enhanced reflexes, he moved through the scene like a phantom, cutting off their escape routes, forcing them into a corner. "Surprised to see me?" Ethan asked calmly, stepping out of the shadows. His ex-girlfriend's face paled and Mark's confidence wavered. "This isn't fair," Mark spat, trying to regain composure. Ethan smiled, cold and deliberate. "Life isn't fair. You know that better than anyone." But he didn't strike, yet. He wanted them to understand the depth of their betrayal, to feel the fear and helplessness he had endured. This was only the beginning. As he watched them struggle, Ethan felt a surge of satisfaction. Revenge wasn't just coming, it was inevitable. Ethan didn't need to rush. Revenge, he knew, was most effective when mental anguish preceded physical confrontation. Mark and his ex-girlfriend were trapped, not by walls, but by fear. The fear of a man they had underestimated, a man who had died once and returned stronger. Using clever tactics, Ethan began to manipulate their movements. He left supplies in impossible locations, forced them into risky encounters with small packs of infected, and created subtle psychological traps that preyed on their paranoia. Every misstep they made was a reminder of their previous betrayal. Meanwhile, Leela stayed by Ethan's side, learning his methods, sharing quiet moments of camaraderie and trust. "You're terrifying," she said one night, watching him plan. Ethan smirked. "No, I'm careful, I survive, and sometimes I make people pay for the mistakes they made with me." The group thrived under his leadership. They were no longer just survivors. They were a team, skilled, cohesive, and loyal. Ethan's second life was shaping into something he had never imagined: love, trust, and power combined. As he observed Mark and his ex-girlfriend from a distance, he realized that revenge was not just about anger, it was about closure. And every day he delayed the final confrontation, he built a stronger, smarter, and more satisfying victory. But even as he orchestrated his game, the city continued to descend into chaos. Supplies dwindled, infected numbers grew, and rival survivor groups became bolder. Ethan knew that the challenges ahead would test him and his newfound happiness with Leela. And deep down, he also knew that the final confrontation was drawing near. And when it came, Mark and his ex-girlfriend would learn exactly why Ethan had been given a second chance. Ethan had been patient long enough. The traps, the psychological games, the careful planning, they had all led to this moment. Mark and his ex-girlfriend, once cocky and careless, were now cornered and desperate. He lured them to an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. The building was dark, cavernous, and full of potential hazards, perfect for a controlled confrontation. Ethan had carefully prepared, using his powers to store tools, barricades, and emergency supplies for any situation. When they arrived, panic was immediately evident. Mark's bravado cracked under the weight of Ethan's calm intensity. His ex-girlfriend clung to him, but even she could see that their predator was no longer the man they had left behind. Mark began, but Ethan cut him off. "You left me to die," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "You think that can just be undone, that I'd let it go?" The confrontation was tense. Mark tried to fight, but Ethan's enhanced reflexes and preparation gave him the upper hand. The traps, carefully laid over days, left Mark stumbling and disoriented. His ex-girlfriend tried to flee, only to find the exits blocked by makeshift barricades Ethan had stored in advance. But Ethan's focus wasn't just revenge, it was control. He wanted them to feel every moment of fear and regret, to understand the depth of betrayal they had caused. By the end of the night, Mark and his ex-girlfriend were trapped, scared, and powerless. Ethan stood over them, not with hatred but with a calm determination. This was justice delivered on his terms, and he savored the moment. Yet even in victory, his mind was clear. He had survived betrayal, apocalypse, and near-death before. Now he had the power to shape the future, not just his own, but those who had wronged him. And in the distance, Leela watched, admiration and something deeper shining in her eyes. Ethan realized that the life he had reclaimed was not just about revenge. It was about building something new, something stronger, and someone he could truly care for. With Mark and his ex-girlfriend neutralized, Ethan finally allowed himself to breathe. The chaos of the apocalypse hadn't lessened, but for the first time he felt control and purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was building. He and Leela led their small group to a more secure location, a former research facility outside the city, fortified with high walls and multiple escape routes. Here, they began salvaging, storing supplies, and fortifying defenses. Ethan used his unique power to keep enough food and medicine hidden within himself to sustain them during raids or shortages. As days passed, the survivors became more than a team, they became a family. Laughter returned, even if briefly, as they shared meals and stories, repaired equipment, and celebrated small victories. The apocalypse hadn't taken everything. For Ethan, the greatest victory was Leela. Trust and respect had grown into something deeper. They shared quiet moments beneath the ruined sky. The tension of survival giving way to fleeting tenderness. Ethan realized that his second chance at life wasn't just about avoiding death. It was about finding someone worth living for. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting golden light across the broken city, Leela reached for his hand. "You've built something amazing here, and I'm glad I get to be part of it," she said softly. Ethan smiled, feeling the weight of his past lift slightly. "This world is still dangerous, but with you, it feels like we can face anything." For the first time, he allowed himself hope, not just for survival, but for joy, companionship, and a life beyond betrayal. But even as peace settled over the group, Ethan remained vigilant. The apocalypse had taught him that danger and betrayal could return at any moment, and he would be ready. Just as the group began to feel secure, the apocalypse reminded them that danger was never far away. Reports of other survivor groups, hostile, ruthless, and desperate, started reaching Ethan. These weren't mindless infected. These were humans willing to kill for resources. One morning, scouts spotted a heavily armed group approaching their facility. Ethan studied them from a distance, analyzing their strategy, numbers, and weaknesses. He could feel Leela tense beside him, her hand brushing against his, a small reminder of what they were fighting for. This time, Ethan didn't act impulsively. He laid traps, reinforced barricades, and coordinated with his group to maximize their chances. Using his stored supplies and enhanced perception, he predicted the attackers' movements, turning their aggression into disadvantage. When the hostile group finally arrived, chaos erupted, but this time, Ethan was ready. Traps disabled vehicles, barricades funneled enemies into confined spaces, and strategic strikes gave the defenders an upper hand. Leela fought fiercely by his side, and the survivors followed his lead flawlessly. By nightfall, the attackers were either captured or driven away, leaving Ethan's group victorious, but wary. The world outside was harsher than ever, and the apocalypse had no mercy for the unprepared. That night, Ethan stood atop the facility's walls, Leela beside him, watching the horizon. "We survived," she whispered. Ethan nodded, the weight of leadership pressing on him. "Yes, but survival isn't enough anymore. We need to thrive to build something lasting even in this chaos, and I will protect us at any cost." For the first time, he realized that this second life wasn't just about revenge or survival. It was about creating a future worth fighting for, with someone he truly loved. Ethan's small community had begun to flourish. Barricades were stronger, gardens were planted, and survivors were learning skills that would allow them to endure. For the first time since his rebirth, Ethan allowed himself moments of peace. But peace was fragile. One day, a scavenger stumbled upon the outskirts of their facility carrying a familiar face, someone from Ethan's first life. The sight of her brought a rush of memories, betrayal, heartbreak, and loss. It was Mark's ex-girlfriend. She had survived the apocalypse, alone and desperate, her arrogance stripped away by hardship. She begged for shelter, pleading for a second chance, claiming she had changed. Ethan's heart wavered for only a moment before clarity returned. He looked at Leela, at the life they were building together, and at the survivors who trusted him completely. Revenge had been served, justice had been delivered. This was not a man who repeated past mistakes. "I survived," Ethan said quietly, "and I won't let the past destroy the future I've built. You have a choice: leave and survive on your own, or stay and face the consequences of your actions." She left, humbled and fearful, disappearing into the ruins she had once helped create. Ethan felt no hatred, only relief. The ghosts of the past were fading, leaving him free to embrace the life he had earned. That night, he and Leela walked through the small community, listening to the quiet laughter of survivors, feeling the warmth of firelight on their faces. Ethan realized that his second chance wasn't just about surviving the apocalypse or punishing betrayal. It was about love, trust, and the joy of building something new. Months had passed since Ethan and Leela's group had begun rebuilding. The small community thrived, a beacon of hope amid the ruins of the apocalypse. Gardens flourished, children played among the barricades, and survivors had a renewed sense of purpose. Ethan stood atop the facility walls, the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Beside him, Leela rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time, he felt truly at peace. The betrayal that had once defined him, the apocalypse that had nearly ended him, the rage and despair, they were all gone, replaced by strength, love, and hope. He had survived the impossible, not just once but twice. He had outsmarted the infected, the rival survivors, and even the ghosts of his past. But the greatest victory wasn't revenge. It was the life he had reclaimed, built from ashes, guided by wisdom and love. Leela looked up at him, smiling softly. "We did it, Ethan. We're really living, not just surviving." He smiled back, squeezing her hand. "Yes, and I'll spend every day making sure we keep living together, no matter what comes next." In the distance, the city was still dangerous, still broken, but within their walls, life had meaning. Laughter, joy, and love had returned. Ethan had not only escaped his doomed fate, he had created a future worth fighting for. And as night fell, he finally allowed himself to rest, knowing that he had been given a second chance, and this time he would never let it slip away. The apocalypse had tried to destroy him, but in the end, Ethan had won. The end.